All right, here we are. We're back again for another episode of the Melillo Method podcast, Everything Brain. I'm Dr. Robert Melillo. This is my colleague, Dr. Peter Schuyler. Welcome.
It's great to be back.
Okay. Yeah. So last one we did, we really kind of in good detail, I think, went through how we change the brain. How do you actually change the brain? You know, and it as we described, it's very complex. It's not easy, and it's not what most people think, and most people don't even know, but they think, oh, you give a pill or you whatever, it changes the brain. You don't change it that way. And we went through that you have to do these developmentally appropriate stages, that you have to go through the normal development to literally physically grow the brain to get it through these developmental stages so that these other higher level skills will emerge out of that, and that you can't necessarily use these emergent skills if the brain hasn't grown yet. And so, you know, we described that, and you have to do it in a balanced way, and you have to use the right modality in the right time for the correct area of the brain. And there's a different right brain versus left brain version and all of that. And then the next question is, okay, you know, we want to be able to prepare people and say, all right, this is how you actually do it. But we need to be able to say, but as the brain changes, there's going to be changes in behavior, and there's going to be changes in emotion, and there's going to be changes in the metabolism, and there's all these changes that are going to happen, which is ultimately what we want to see and what the parents want or what the patient wants. But they may look at it and go, okay, yeah, there's obviously change, but is this a good change or a bad change? Because change doesn't always look good, and more commonly, it doesn't look good. And that is something that, you know, is the reason why I wrote Reconnected Kids, my second book, trade book after Disconnected Kids. So, and you were always the best at being able to break that down and talk about it to parents and to staff, and to be able to explain, you know, how to use it and what's important. So, you know, let's get into that. Let's explain, okay, when you do change the brain, what do you expect?
Yeah, especially for families that are coming into us that already have a behavioral diagnosis. Okay, their child has oppositional defiance, or there is these different emotional based symptoms that are there. Okay, or they may have an underlying mood disorder, and so when you all of a sudden, because I remember in the early years, I'd call you up all the time. I'm like, because we'd go in and we'd just start stimulating, and we'd have some of the protocols that we were alluding to last time. And then all of a sudden, it seemed like the child got worse. But in reality, they weren't getting worse. They were actually in my words, developmentally stair-stepping, that they were actually going through. And so let's talk about an example of where, again, this child that might be chronologically 5 years old. Okay, so they're at the height of a 5-year-old. They may, in some instances, have the same weight of what would be typical of a 5-year-old. But their brain age, based on the examination that we did, was half their chronological age. So here you have this maybe 24-month-old child in the body of a 5-year-old, okay? And now we're starting to stimulate their brain, and we're seeing these sensory motor changes. But all of a sudden, mom's running into your office going, like, my child was a bigger jackass today than ever. Why is that the case?
Right.
And you're like, well, wait a second. Now they're actually having some level of independence. You have to give the parent, like, okay, what was the behavior? What did you see? What happened beforehand that maybe brought on that behavior? And be able to explain to them that that behavior that they demonstrated actually was an appropriate behavior.
For that age.
For that age level that they were processing through.
Right. But they never went through.
They never went through. Now, the challenging factor is the fact that they're more physically stronger. Okay.
Exactly. Right.
And so in that instance where they should have gone through their terrible twos, extending into a 3-year-old level, well, they're now going through that process.
Right. And they're 8 or 9 or 10.
Oh, especially in those kind of cases. Yeah.
And that's the thing, you know, so give you an example. Everybody knows something called the terrible twos, that kids, you know, really around, you know, 36 months, so it's really more the terrible threes, is really difficult. And that's when the left brain starts to come online, and that's when they're more their agency and their independence comes on, and they want to move around. And, we have a typical toddler, and, the parent just has to follow them around. And if you try to stop them, they cry and they scream, and then they want you and they don't want you. And, that's typical. You expect it in a 2 or 3 year old. And they're small enough that you can control them or do whatever, and you can pick them up. But then, we say to parents, your child ever go through the terrible twos? No. They're a perfect child. They have no problem, but they can't speak, but they can't do this. And then, we start working with them. And then all of those things start to emerge. They start going through the terrible twos, and they are more motor active or more independent or more oppositional looking.
Yeah, they
but
say
now,
no for the first time.
Yeah,
right?
now they're big. They're
Yeah.
8 to 10 years old, and now it's not so easy to hold them down or stop them. And so, life becomes a little hairy for a little while. And again, that's where we get parents to say, is this helpful or is it not? So it's all about preparing them beforehand. If we have an onset, if a child starts to stutter, let's say, and they never stuttered before. Yeah. Now, stuttering is a normal developmental stage. All 4-year-old kids usually go through a period where they stutter a little bit. That's normal, right? All these things. OCD, there's a period where OCD is normal.
Fear.
All 2-year-olds are hyperactive and have ADHD, right? So at a certain point, no kids have any verbal skills. So most of these things are normal developmental stages. They're just not normal for this age, or they didn't go through it, or they went through it and it never ended. So that, as we're working with a child and a child starts to stutter all of a sudden, the parent can come to us and go, oh my God, my child is stuttering. I mean, this is terrible. This is horrible. What'd you do to them? And after the fact, if we say, oh, that's normal, we expected that, they're going to think, yeah, you're full of it. You're just telling me that right now. But if beforehand you say to them, by the way, as we start working, the child may look like they regress, or they may get worse, or different things may happen. They may start stuttering. And then when they stutter, now the parents go, oh, okay, I'm not liking this, or I'm concerned with it, but I understand now this is a normal developmental stage that we want them to go through, that they have to go through. Yeah. Because we talk about this brain developmental blueprint. There's a blueprint, an optimal blueprint to the way that the optimal brain of anybody is built. And we need to go through that. And, there's not many different versions of that. There's really one version of the optimal way to build a brain. And that is all steps of our life. And, our brain is maturing up to probably at least 40 or 50. They say that the brain, develops until 25, but that's because the main study looking at that only looked up to 25. But we know that the brain is still myelinating up until 50. So that the brain there's still these developmental stages that we're going through. And how we get there and where we get there, whether we get there late or whether we get there early or whether we never get there, is dependent on how the brain is growing and developing. And that's the whole idea. So, if you're going through certain stages, this is why I wrote the book, so that parents could read it. And we tell parents that the first thing they should do is read Disconnected Kids before they even come in, so they understand the model of the whole, what's the actual root cause, and the whole hemispheric model, and how to identify what's going on, and does this fit your child, and explain the behaviors that you see and the symptoms. And then they come in, and now they're prepared, and now we can talk to them, and we can assess their child, and we can put together a program individualized, and we can implement it and teach them how to implement it at home. But then as soon as they start that, from day one, we get people that on the way home from the assessment, they'll call and say, is it possible that my child is already different? Or we get kids that have never slept, the first night they sleep. And that's good, but then there may also be negative things. So we tell them from day one, you need to read Reconnected Kids, because it's like an instruction manual for child development that, most people are not given that. We don't know what's supposed to happen or develop. We give these basic milestones that pediatricians don't usually even pay attention to. And so this is really an instruction manual of how your child should develop and when they should be doing these things. And it really should be pretty consistent. And if they didn't reach it, or they skipped over it, or they're stuck in a phase, then there's a problem. And the brain needs to be changed for them to change their behavior.
Yeah, and what I always liked about this book was the fact that in the early chapters, you really did a terrific job for these parents in the sense that you put it in all the domains that are typically the domains that we're looking for when we do these checklists and to make the initial quote unquote diagnosis of where this child is. So we look at socializational functions, or we look at emotional development, or we look at behavioral questionnaires, and then we have these sensory and motor scores, and especially in the traditional occupational and physical therapy arena. And so what you did there was you actually said, okay, well, let me show you what actually happens at between 3 and 6 months, 6 and 9, and so on. You went to 1 year, 1.5 years, 2 years. And so it's a very simple way for the parents. And what I've done over the years with my families is that, I say, oh, listen, we have this brain age based on the assessment, but now what I want you to do is really go in there and check mark and see what levels that your child went through in their emotional development or their social development, and then circle what you think is missing. Because the reality is that at some point, they're probably going to move through that. And that's going to give us good indications of where we're headed. And now that we've been doing this for a long time, I think between the two of us, we have almost 50 years of experience where, for us, it's very simple. We see an exam, we see the complexity of this case, but in our head, we've already worked with so many of these kids like this. So we can give probably a really good expertise level where we're going to be at 12 months from now, or
we know
24 months.
Happen,
yeah.
Right.
But still, even with that, you still have to give these parents this ability to say, okay, hey, here's what I think is going to happen in the first 3 months of the program.
Right.
Here's what I think we're going to be at 9 months. Okay. Right. Here's where I think, because if you're coming in and you're expecting me to make all these dramatic changes in a window of an intensive of a week, or how we've done it in the past where we're working with families 3 months or 6 month intervals. No, here's what reality is, okay? And I think, and especially in the autism community, because the autism community will either be driven by the severity of the behavior, okay, or the fact that they're barely speaking.
Right.
And so there is a certain level of expectation that the families have coming in to say, well, I want you to get my child's behavior under control, or I want my child to speak and communicate and have conversations. Well, it doesn't just happen that way.
No.
Okay.
Right. There's a process, just like, there's a developmental process you have to go through as you grow. You don't just suddenly, 4 years old one day, and then all of a sudden some people end up being 8 years old. It doesn't work that way, yeah. Right? We have to go through that. But the good news is we can do it at an accelerated rate, meaning we can go through a year's worth of development, maybe in a couple of weeks or a couple of months, but we still have to go through multiple years.
And to that point, what you're really at that point, sometimes when they're going through that very aggressive acceleration, it could be a really rough ride. It can be a crazy ride for these families. I mean, because they're leapfrogging these developmental, and I tell families all the time, like, listen, your child just compressed maybe like 6 months of development in a matter of a month.
Right.
Okay. And you're going to see some intensity there.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's where, that's why preparing them is so important before we even start anything, saying this is what you got to be prepared for. And again, I say, this is your mantra. Change is good, but it doesn't always look good.
Yeah.
And in cases, especially with the right brain, it probably more often looks bad. And then we go on to explain why, and we'll do that as we go on here. But so they're prepared and understand that you want change. You're here. The biggest complaint we get when people come in, and I work with, and you work with people from all over the world that have been everywhere, supposedly to the best. And, they don't, no one even tells them what the actual problem is because they don't really understand it. And, you ask them, well, what's the biggest complaint you have of any of the therapies that you did? And usually it's that I didn't really see much change, or I didn't see any change.
Yeah.
And so I tell them, well, that's not going to happen here. You're going to see change, but your challenge is you're going to say, is this a good change or a bad change? Yeah. So I'm preparing you that, we're ultimately going to make your child or your life better. But for a while, it's going to get hairy. And I tell them things like, know as we're trying to grow the brain and have a skill emerge out of that, nothing just turns on and stays on, right? It turns on and then it goes off again. Yeah. And then it comes on and stays a little longer, and then it goes off. And then it comes on and stays even longer, and then eventually it comes on and stays on. Nothing, you want to get rid of tics or stimming or, anger outbursts or biting or bad behavior or bedwetting or whatever. It doesn't just shut off and stay off. It shuts off and then it comes back, and then it shuts off and it cuts back, so that they don't get discouraged. They go, oh, we have families that, they'll come and they go home and all of a sudden they'll be like, wow, our child who's never spoke before, hasn't spoken since they were 2 and they lost speech, they just said 3 sentences. But now they haven't spoken again for another 2 months. Okay, you just saw it coming. It's coming. We got them to speak. Focus on that. And so, as you said, you have things that are coming on and going off, and coming on and going off. You have things that are going away and coming back, going away and coming back. And all of this is happening in a compressed short period of time over what would normally take years. And this can be pretty hairy, right? Yeah. And it can get pretty, but as long as they're prepared and they know and they're desperate for change, and then they actually feel like, wow, this is great, and we even tell them things like, as new areas of the brain grow, other areas go down for a little while. Because there's only so much in blood and oxygen to go away. And so they may even start wetting the bed. A 10-year-old who hasn't wet the bed in 5 years might start wetting the bed. And if you don't know that, are pooping their pants, they may look at it and go, this is horrible. No, it's actually exactly what we expect. And then they look and they go, and when it happens, they actually say, wow, okay, great. And I'm glad you warned me.
Because it's really important to be able to explain to the families that we're working with is the asymmetry of our emotions, okay? And especially when we're dealing with these very dominant left brain children in the autism population or even the ADHD population, where, again, that left brain allows them to have those routines, allows them to have that familiarity. They like everything in a very rigid way. So they're really going to fight against the novelty. They're going to fight against change, okay? Or we swing over and we start stimulating that right brain. Well, we know the right brain is really that emotional brain, okay, and it really has these, sadness, and we may see a child all of a sudden have remorse, okay, that they get angry at their parents and they lash out and they may bite and they may kick, and then all of a sudden they cry about it, okay, or they do cry for the first time, okay. So I think that's a big thing that we have to always constantly be telling these parents, and I just learn now all the time is that, like, listen, we're going to probably have some rough seas a little bit here, and we're going to see these maybe emotional outbursts. But why are they having the emotional outbursts? They're responding to their environment more. Or, we may oftentimes see where, we've described, I think, autism almost like this, that they're looking at the world like this, and the world is here, but their awareness to the world is not there. And then all of a sudden we start stimulating their right brain, and now they have this more awareness. And so in that classroom where they may have been that rule follower and they may have done everything like to the T, now all of a sudden they're curious over here what Johnny's doing over there or something like that. And so now it's like, oh my gosh, my child no longer just has autism, they got ADHD.
Right.
And I'm like, no, they're finally paying attention to the world around them, okay? Yes. And they're cueing in on nonverbal aspects that are happening, okay? They're curious, because before they would have just locked in on something and been very specific, but now they're like, oh, and we see it all the time. And I've gotten to the point now where I have my families constantly writing me like almost like weekly summaries. And I think we have a book here probably to sit here and talk about these experiences, because they come on in a very timeline orientation.
Yeah, and that's why, as you said, I created 3 different really kind of milestones, or 3 different, graphs that go through a child from 0 to basically 18 years of age. And there's the physical development of their body, how they grow, their motor movements, when their teeth should emerge, and we see a lot of deviations of that, right?
Mhm.
Basic physical development where
Yeah.
kids are much smaller, or their teeth grow early, or they don't grow their teeth, or when they should go to the bathroom, or when all these different physical
And
motor
especially those
milestones.
midline functions that we talked about.
Yeah.
And again, how many parents are coming in and telling us that their child is tongue tied, okay, or have some type of oral motor asymmetry there. But in
Yes.
reality, and then again, they're using appliances to fix this, or they're doing stuff like that. But in our world, I think it's like, no, like your midline neurology is actually abnormal, and that's why these midline structures in your mouth are not actually developing.
And by abnormal, we mean basically just underdeveloped,
Yeah.
or immature, or one side is more mature than the other.
Yeah.
And that is, again, we know that all little children, when they start speaking, don't articulate well.
Yeah.
They speak with a lisp, or, they may struggle, and they will repeat things initially. They will parrot it, called echolalia, or they'll do what we call idiopraxia, where they mimic what you do. Monkey see, monkey
Yeah.
do. These are normal things. These are normal stages of development. And they
Or
need to go
palealia,
through
where
this.
they repeat these phrases over and over and over.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So that is normal developing. But, when we get a kid, let's say, on the autism spectrum, and all they do is echolalia, or all they do is actually scripting, and they never get through that. And they don't get to the next stage where they have normal, language conversations. It can be confusing, especially where if you take a nonverbal kid who's not speaking at all, and then they start echoing, that's a good thing. But it doesn't always look good. And
Yeah.
and as you said, with the right brain in particular, because, when we talk about behavior, first of all, there's two basic platforms of all behavior. And really it goes back to, the idea of movement initiates brains, and movement initiates the development, and it's approach and avoidance. We are either moving towards something or moving away. And the left brain is about approaching and moving towards. The right brain is about avoiding or withdrawing or moving away. And that is the basic platform. And so we look at emotions, and what are emotions? Emotions they motivate us to do a certain behavior. So they're there to motivate us to either, run toward or fight, or run away and protect, right? So they're going to motivate us. So we look at different emotions that are there that have to emerge first from sensations, sensing our body. Before we can have fear, we need to be able to perceive pain, right? We have to feel pain, and then we're like, oh, that hurts.
Yeah.
And then we become afraid of that, and then we develop fear. We're not going to have fear if we don't have pain, right? And we can't appreciate somebody else's pain if we never have pain. So empathy, the ability to socialize and non-verbally communicate. We need to non-verbally communicate before we verbally communicate. So we need to go through all these different stages, and the right brain develops first, and then the left brain. And so the right brain governs mostly what we call negative behaviors. So, the feelings of things like pain, or hot, or cold, or hungry, or thirsty, or when we have to go to the bathroom. Mostly feelings that may make us feel uncomfortable, that make us go, oh, let's withdraw, or let's, take care of this, or we need to be able to allow our parents to know when we need help, or when we're in trouble, or when we're in pain. When we need to eat, when we're tired and we need to go to bed. And they make us feel uncomfortable. And then on top of that are right brain emotions. And those are things like sadness and fear, sense of danger. Like you said, shame, embarrassment, and guilt, but also empathy and attachment and love, and wanting to be a part of a group and being connected to a group of people. And, that is the driving factor of the right brain, is to connect with other people and to be able to regulate our body and perceive our body. So when we see that, a child starts feeling pain, that doesn't feel good, and it doesn't look good.
Yeah.
They may have never felt pain before, and now they feel pain. They've never felt hot before or cold. They may have never really felt hungry before. And so what does that look like when that starts to emerge in a child, especially an older child, a 10-year-old, 11, 12-year-old kid? And then they start to feel emotions. We know that the left brain generates joy and happiness. And I say to parents all the time, these big left brain kids with autism, Does your child ever laugh for no reason or seemingly no reason? Yeah, all the time.
Yeah,
You know,
silly behavior that you
yeah,
might see.
they
Yeah.
get giddy or silly or 3 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
They wake up and they're laughing in
Yeah.
their bed, right? And a parent knows it's not normal behavior, but they're not concerned because they're laughing.
Yeah.
And I say to them, what's going to happen now is that the right brain wakes up. They're going to start sobbing. They're going to start crying sad tears that they've never cried before.
Mm-hmm.
And now, for no reason, they may start sobbing and crying. And now your heart's going to break and you're going to be like, oh my God, something's wrong.
Yeah.
But I'm telling you, it's a good thing. Be happy and just, soothe them, do whatever you got to do. But it's just their right brain waking up.
Yep.
And that's what you want, right? They may start to be afraid of things they were never afraid before. And that's a good thing. But as parents, I tell them we don't want our kids to feel sad. We don't want our kids to be afraid. We don't want them to feel shameful or guilty. But they have to if they're going to, be able to go through the world in a normal way. And if they're going to be able to relate to what other people feel, because if they don't feel those things, they don't relate to other people feeling them. And then they'll never develop normal social relationships. And that's autism to the extreme.
Yeah. And when you see it in the sense of where they pick up a parent's prosodity now, okay, or they're reading more nonverbal gestures or nonverbal signs from the mom, especially the mom, all of a sudden that look might stop them in their tracks.
Right.
Okay.
Or prosodity means tone of voice. They hear her yell or, say something in an angry way and they go, oh, they never registered before.
And that's one of the things I've been teaching many of my families throughout the world is this idea of like how to exacerbate that now, when and especially coming from the left side of their space, okay, and giving them it. Because one, for the most part, the majority of kids are not even making eye contact. Now all of a sudden they are making eye contact. Now they are looking at you, or they're, like you said, they have this more joint attention. So their right brain is spending more time receiving that signals. Okay.
Right.
So now you should augment those signals to them.
Right.
Okay. Give them more.
Right.
And so I think that that's a big thing. And then, the other aspect of it is that when you start actually seeing some of these abnormal, not abnormal behaviors, but these changes in behaviors to where I always say to parents, well, now you may actually have to parent. Okay. Right. Because unfortunately, I think that in the world of special needs, we've kind of allowed the new generation parents are saying, kind of just let them be, coddle them, okay? This gentle parenting where
just let them be who they were born to be, right?
And where I think over my career, some of the best parents I ever seen were the parents that just no, we have expectations of our child. The world will have expectations of their child, even though they have these various diagnoses. And so I tell parents all the time, I have to get on them about, hey, you got to be a parent now. You have to actually give them boundaries. You have to let them know that you're upset with them now.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. And the kids want those boundaries. People don't realize that actually when kids don't have boundaries, I tell parents all the time, children know that they're not supposed to be in charge. They don't know much and they'll fight against it, but they know they're not supposed to be in charge. And when they are in charge, it makes them very anxious. And then that shows up as certain behaviors because, they're nervous, they're anxious, and they may be hyperactive or whatever. They need that type of structure. They want that type of structure. And, so an example of that is, when you look at, Alan Shore has done a great job of describing the stages of development and attachment and how the right brain to the right brain communication, especially of the mother. So in psychology, there's an actual term, this is an actual scientific term, that mothers, when they're taking care of their child, they normally use something called mother ease. It's literally a way that they talk instinctively, which means that they open their eyes really big, they exaggerate their facial expression, and they use this sing-song type of up and down, exaggerating that variation of their tone of voice. And they know that this gets a reaction from the child, and then the child mimics that, and that triggers that, and then they smile, and the child starts using their voice, And, and then the mother gets happy with that and she does it back. And there's this communication and her right brain to their right brain. That's why most children, in the world, they most breastfeed from the left side so that the mother's right brain talks to the child's right brain. And that's the way it's supposed to develop. And then around 18 months, 15 to 18 months, the mother will use a show of disgust for something that the child did. And it's instinctual. She's not necessarily doing it because she's, trying to make her child feel disgusting. But let's say the child is, 15, 18 months, they're walking around, they put their hand in the toilet, right? Yeah. And the mother's going to go, oh, don't do that. Yeah. And they get that facial expression. And then the child sees it, registers, and that triggers guilt and shame. It triggers that emotion. Mm-hmm. And then they feel guilt and shame, and the child will normally avert their eyes and feel bad and then come to the parent to be soothed and attached to them. And that's building that attachment, that's building that socialization and that normal, communication. And that's normal. That's what's supposed to happen. And, that is, at the right stage. But we see kids with right brain delays. They may not feel any shame or any guilt or any embarrassment at all. And if you don't understand shame, embarrassment, and guilt, you'll never really learn right from wrong. And so they do things wrong over and over and over again, and they're constantly getting in trouble. And the parents are like, when are they going to learn? And they're not learning because of that. And so, in one model, you could say, well, the mother didn't give those signals when they were supposed to because she wasn't around, or the child was in daycare, or, the mother was neglectful or whatever. Our model is that no, that brain didn't grow. And even though the mom was giving the right signals at that motherese type of thing at that point, the child's brain was too immature to perceive that. And, and so they didn't register it. And so they didn't ever, that emotion, that part of the brain never grew and it didn't emerge. And they still don't have guilt or shame or embarrassment in any way. And they may never have it. And by giving them that facial expression over and over isn't going to make that emerge. You have to make the brain grow from the bottom up, like we talked about. And that is, a critical thing. So as you're saying, the timing has to match. If the mother, as the child gets bigger, they don't use motherese anymore. Mm-hmm. They speak to them like an adult would speak to them in a proper, without as much exaggeration. But yet their brain may be at the point where they need that level. So as you're saying, as it starts to emerge, we teach the parents, show disgust, but really exaggerate it, or show anger and really exaggerate it, or show you're happy, and really exaggerate it. Exaggerate that motion as you would in a small child, in this older child, because otherwise they may not be able to register it.
And especially in these children that are left brain dominant and have these very sophisticated left brain, most of the time those parents are actually speaking left brain to left brain.
Yes.
Okay. And so they're augmenting that left brain. And then the same thing is if they're allowing them to have the tablet times, or they're watching the YouTube videos, or they're watching their favorite cartoons. And again, they're allowing them to loop that. They're not fostering this right brain resonance that has to happen. And we also know, and we've spoken about this on multiple podcasts now, about this sensory motor aspect. Okay. So, if your child is gifted in these left brain aspects, they're like, okay, oh, Johnny has a real interest in dinosaurs. So we just let him, read as many books about dinosaurs. We find these videos about dinosaurs.
Right.
But over here, he doesn't have the motor planning, the muscle tone to learn how to ride a bike, okay? Or go to these jumping places now that are all over the place and do all that. And so they're not fostering this right brain environment. And so I think that's a big challenge too, is that, trying to get them to use their social, emotional right brain aspect, and especially in these families that they themselves are very gifted left brain people.
Right.
Okay. So, and we know that really the explosion of all this is the idea that we've been probably over the last 30 years, maybe longer than that, building this very left brain dominant society worldwide. And we know that Ian McGilchrist is talking about that. And
Yep.
and that's why we think that these traits are exacerbating at the level that they're really exacerbating. And so I think that trying to get those families out of that left brain world
Yes.
and swing over here to this right brain world
Right.
to where, hey, be physical with your child. Because one of the things that Shore talks about is this kinesthetic aspect, the tactile aspect of development. Okay, it's
Right.
not just the eye contact and the gestures, but hey, how many parents are being kinesthetic with your child? Okay, picking it up, swinging them around, climbing. He talks about one of the chapters of the book where, again, the transition of moms in that earlier, but then the dad's interaction and the dad's roughhousing and
Yep.
doing all these physical components
Yep.
that engage the right side of the brain.
Right.
So we're not doing that at a society worldwide right now.
Yeah. And, you look at it as a perfect example, first 3 years during right brain development, those are the toddler years, right?
Yeah.
And so what is the child doing? They're constantly moving.
Yeah.
Any normal child will constantly be moving. And any parent that's gone through it knows that that's hard because one parent or the other has to literally follow the child around on the brink of falling and hitting their head
Yeah.
or climbing up things or whatever. And you're constantly vigilant watching them and worried about them. But if you go to pick them up, they cry and they scream and they want to move around because that's what they're supposed to be doing. That's what their instincts are telling them. And now we live in a world where we're like, okay, well,
Everything's
it's
sterile.
hard for me
Yeah.
to move around. So let me give them this cell phone
Yeah.
and let them look at it. And now they sit and now they'll stare at this cell phone and they'll do this. And that makes it easier for me because I don't have to walk around and worry about them and they're safe, because they may not fall down
Yeah.
and they, and everybody seems happy. But what you're doing is you just stopped that right brain development. You just stopped it and you brought that left brain on too early. And that's the problem. If it comes on too early, that's a problem. If it comes on too late, that's a problem.
Yeah.
And anything we do, and like you said, there's so much out there with McGilchrist and other people talking about how, we're seeing such a shift towards the left brain dominant world, really in the last couple of 100 years since the development of Western civilization. And we see it in education. And we see it in psychotherapy, and we see it in everything where, everything is, we think of the left brain and information, and that's intellectual,
Yeah.
and the left brain is the dominant brain, and the left brain is the verbal brain, and the left brain is the super intelligent. The right brain is a dumb brain, and the
Yeah.
right brain is just feelings and just base emotions, and that it's not really, and the fact that there isn't even a right or left brain, that, and that what we want to do is everything moving towards this high intellectual, verbal, factual, analytical, sense, and that is really the intelligence, where really what's emerging is that the right brain is really the intelligent brain. That's the super intelligent brain, because the right brain takes multiple bits of information from everywhere and synthesizes it instantaneously all at once. And intuitively, we immediately know what's right or what's wrong. And we don't have to say it because saying it is too slow. And that's the thing, that the right brain is so much faster than the left brain, that the left brain is very slow.
Yeah.
It's very deliberate and one step at a time and sequentially. And I believe that now, like with kids that are dyslexic or people that have learning disabilities or left brain deficits, that the problem is that their right brain is so good and they're so bright and they know things automatically and they think of things in multiple pathways simultaneously, and they automatically know the answer intuitively. And then the academic world says, oh no, you have to explain how you got that answer. Just getting the right
Welcome
answer
to my
isn't
world.
enough, right? Exactly. And so now they have to slow their brain down, that fast right brain.
Yeah.
That instantaneous right brain has to slow down to be able to do it in a deliberate way and give me the words and tell me the steps and read this letter one step at a time and then figure out what the whole thing is. When they look at it and they're like, I already know what the whole story's about. I already figured it out.
Yeah.
No, you have to read the words and you have to go through it. And that, I think, and then we say that, oh, they're dumb, they're learning disabled, they're not as smart, they can't read,
Yeah.
they speak in a very unsophisticated way. And now we're looking at it like saying, no, they're actually we're asking them to force their brain to slow down, to do it in a left brain style. And they're already way beyond that. And that's really hard. So it's not that they're slower. It's not that they're dumber. It's that they're so fast and we're trying to dumb them down into the left brain world, which we think is the intellectual world because it has a voice. But, the difference between knowing information and being wise, right? I think everybody understands that difference.
Yeah.
The left brain knows all this information.
Yeah.
It has all these facts and details. But it's not wise. It doesn't really understand. It doesn't have concepts. It doesn't understand context.
Yeah,
And
relatability. I mean, how does it relate at all?
context is everything.
Yeah,
And that's
sure.
one of the things like we look at now, like, the idea of, we have to look at history in the context of history.
Yeah.
And so we can look at the founding fathers and say, we look at the facts and they had slaves. And so they're bad, evil people and we need to cancel them and take their, as opposed to saying, no, put it in the context of history of where they were and look at their whole life and look at their body of work. And they created the Constitution and they freed people ultimately. And, but you need to look at it in the context. And that's what the right brain is able to do. But we're in such a left brain world where it's no context. This is what they did, so therefore it's wrong. So therefore they're evil, and we should
Everything's like in
eliminate that.
120 characters, right?
And it's all left brain. And,
Yeah.
and again, even they talk about, we're in that new book that we're into right now, The Divided Therapist, talking about how right brain therapy, how, they used to look at cognitive behavioral therapy and talk about talk therapy. Talk therapy is obviously left brain. It's about talking and analyzing your thoughts and every step of it. But really, it's the feelings. It's your feelings. It's the things you can't put to words. It's your underlying, the context of what's going on in your life. And that's where trauma lives. And that's where our emotions live. And you can't describe that properly. And so that's where they're saying what we really need is really more of a right brain therapy that's a listening therapy, that's an understanding, that's an empathic, that doesn't have to break down everything into words and to details. And we don't have to make everything subconscious conscious to be able to heal it, that we heal the subconscious. And, that is really where I think everything is going. And I think that's a huge shift in the way that we can think about the world and really the fact that we're trying to cram everything into this left brain slower way, yet we think that's the more sophisticated and intellectual, and all our education and all our therapies and all our media and everything is there. And it's really completely against the way humans are supposed to work. And that's McGilchrist's whole thing really, is that you ruin it when you try to intellectualize it.
And you see it again with many of these parents that, and especially the grandparents that are like, oh, if the child's not speaking or barely speaking, okay, we need to get an iPad and we need to download all these apps. And all the time, I'm like, take it and throw it in the trash.
Yes.
Because that's not how
Yes.
their verbal development is going to occur. We need to develop this whole nonverbal side of the brain that's going to allow for, like you said, that fast processing, okay, and pick up, because we see it all the time in those families that have chosen to do some therapy that with a verbal child that works on verbal repetition, okay. Yes, they may have gone from 10 words to 300 words now or 500 words, but when they do use their language, it's not put together. It doesn't make sense. All they're doing is repeating what they've learned in that environment. But they're not going. And so I think that that's where what we've seen over the years with the language development. And I just had a parent that I'm working with in Romania right now, and she's just doing a marvelous job, really writing me these stories every week about what's happening with her son. And now he's like using like 3 and 4 words and putting them together, and then from there it went to where now he's making whole sentences, and then the whole sentences are having meaning. And then the other day he said something to his sister and asked her how she felt.
Right.
It's like the first time he's ever done that.
Right.
So he's gone through these transitions all because we've been stimulating the right brain. Nothing to do with the fact that we're stimulating the left brain.
Right. Exactly. And that's, that's the whole idea is that, the way it actually works is that everything we experience, everything in life, just like the right brain develops first, we always experience everything with the right brain first, right? So the right brain pays attention, it's sensory, it takes in information. Then it exchanges it and it has to flow to the left, right? There's always got to be this flow back and forth. And both sides of the brain are always working, but they're doing completely different things, or at least that's how they're supposed to be. And so anything that blocks that flow from right to left or left to right is a problem. And so it always comes into the right. The right pays attention. It perceives it. So we perceive it. Then it transfers to the left, and then the left brain analyzes it. And it analyzes it, and it sequences it, and it puts it in the context of some sort of memory. And so we can memorize it or learn it. And then, the left brain can verbalize it. And then it has to go back to the right brain for final processing, for understanding it and really comprehending what all this information means and putting it into the context
of the environment that's
of
right
everything
now.
else, right? And that's the way it has to work. And it needs to be able to flow back and forth. If we have this imbalance, then, if the right brain is deficient, it doesn't come into the right. And then the left brain gets it, and the left brain analyzes it and memorizes it and then repeats it over and over and over.
And the content of the left brain.
It just has no context. And it's just, repeating it and doing it, and it's scripting, or it's echolalia, or it's only speaking to needs.
Yep.
And, parents will say, I want my child to speak so badly. And then the child may start to speak and only speak in needs.
Yeah.
Water, one word thing. And then they'll say, well, I really want them to have a conversation. I want them to tell me how their day was, right? Okay, well, that's right brain conversation.
Yeah.
The right brain wants to talk about their feelings and emotions and what that
Which
means.
comes with embodiment.
And that, right. And so, what you really want is you need the contribution of the right brain to the language. You don't want them just to speak words and just, give you single words that tells you their needs. You want to know their feelings. You don't want to know their thoughts. You want to understand their experiences. And you want them to understand yours.
Yeah.
And that conversation is not verbal speech.
Yeah.
If you only had left brain verbal language, it would only speak to needs and use as few words as possible, or it would just repeat things, or it would just repeat facts that it's learned over and over and over, because the left brain likes repetition, it likes familiarity, it likes to do the same thing over and over. That's why obsessive compulsive type of behavior. But if you really want language, you need the right brain. So again, we can learn the words, we can learn how to sequence, we can learn syntax, we can learn all of that and memorize them, but then we need the right brain to really make it into a conversation. And we need the nonverbal communication of facial expression and tone of voice and gestures and all of that to happen. So wrapping this all up, basically in Reconnected Kids, we go through, it's an instruction manual for your brain or your child's brain. If you don't go through those different stages, then there's an issue, right? And we need to go back and we need to look at where it went off, and we need to grow the brain again through stimulus and activity. And that book can be used as a guide to see, what type of behavior should emerge? How many words should a child be speaking at 1 and at 18 months and at 2? And, then what other cognitive skills should arise at 4 and 5? And, when should fears come out? There's normal stages of fears that come out, and these are all normal. And when should the kid go through an ADHD phase? And when should they go through an obsessive phase? Or when should they normally stutter? And, and then how does that match with how big they're getting and what they're able to do motorically? And then what their social and emotional development should look like. How are they interacting with other people? And all of that is in that book. And so that is something that we really encourage people to read and to learn. And then, it also gives you ideas of how to manage these behavioral changes as they're coming about, because it's not easy. And we recognize that it maybe get pretty hairy. But, this is all part of it. And so again, If you're going through a program like Melillo Method where you're seeing changes and they're confusing, understand that change is good. It doesn't always look good. Read the book and it'll give you a better understanding of that. But that this is all part of the process. And in general, it's all good.
So if you're out there, get the Disconnected Kids, the third edition, and then click on the Reconnected Kids, and
Right.
and let's get that, because it is. I mean, it's such a great book, and I think it's been an underutilized book. And it's not quite as popular as the Disconnected Kids book, but we need to get it more popular, because I think it does give these families these guidelines that go along with the process, because it is this process, and we can't jump ahead. We got to go one by one, but we can really use this as a way to give us a guideline of where we need to go, and then when we actually got there, what's coming behind it,
What's coming next,
what's
right?
coming next.
And we make sure we're on the right path. So it's giving little breadcrumbs to say to you, you're on the right path. Keep on going.
Exactly.
And really, you shouldn't use one without the other. I mean, if people get Disconnected Kids, they get it and they use it on their own, on themselves or on their child, then you're going to see changes, and you need to be prepared and you need to know how to manage that. If you're reading Disconnected Kids and then you go to one of the practitioners that we've trained or us, you're going to go through it and then you're going to get it, and then you need to be prepared. So either way, if you're getting Disconnected Kids, most people aren't getting that book just for an enjoyable read.
Yeah.
They're getting it because they really want to create change. They want to understand and they want to implement it. It's a book. It's a manual. It's meant to be implemented. And you really need to understand, and Reconnected Kids should be the next book you read. Okay, great. So I think we're giving a good background here. Another great episode. Thank you very much. This was great. We will see you again next time.